Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about. So today, America decides to just throw money at a problem and see if it'll go away. It actually looks like that might work. Stalin gets grumpy about it, picks a dumb battle over it. Figuratively, he's going to lose that battle, figuratively, and then builds a wall out of spite. Now, let's put that into context. Let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so yesterday we were talking about this new concept of containment. Touched on it briefly. It is this idea that you can't stop communism from spreading or eliminate it from places it already is, because by doing so, by going in and aggressively stopping a country from being communist that already is communist, you're going to tick off Russia and it's going to lead to World War III, and with everybody having nuclear weapons, the world's annihilated and everybody dies. You don't want World War III. So, without being able to go into a country and stop it from becoming communist that has already become communist, the focus becomes, do not let a new country become communist. That is the primary objective. Contain communism. Where it already is just a necessary evil the world's going to have to deal with in the mind of America. However, you can't let it spread. So containment, this idea that don't let communism spread, is a motivating factor for the United States, really for the entire rest of this unit. So Harry S. Truman, the president that made the decision to drop the atomic bomb in World War II, is still the president of the United States. This is a picture here of Harry Truman coming up with the Truman Doctrine. So, the Truman Doctrine, it basically is just America formally explaining our stance on containment, which means by any means necessary, you cannot let a country become communist. So this newspaper headline here says, we are going to give aid to any country needed to prevent them from becoming communist. Greece was a big concern. It was right there on the edge of the Iron Curtain. West Germany, we're going to talk a lot about Germany today. Germany's divided in half. West Germany, America is very concerned West Germany could fall into communist control since East Germany already is. The Truman Doctrine says any means necessary prevent these countries from becoming communist. All right? Now, you can do whatever. Like, that is a blank slate. You can do whatever you need to prevent countries from becoming communist. Because for every country that becomes communist, that is one less country that is a democracy. America wants to take over the world and shape it in the interest of America, which is to make everything a democracy. Russia wants to take it all over and become communist. So, as Russia spreads out, it hurts American power for every country that Russia takes over. So the Truman Doctrine says anything goes. If we have to go blow up a country to prevent it from being communist, so be it. Like, the Truman Doctrine wasn't necessarily trying to play nice. It said, I don't care what happens. These countries cannot be communist. End of story. Whatever you got to do, turn them into a lake, don't care, can't be communist. So the question here is, what was the Truman Doctrine? And why was it important after World War II for American interests? So, what was the Truman Doctrine, and why is it good for us if countries don't become communist? So, pause me, answer that completely, and we'll move on. So, interestingly, I got a picture here of a guy named George Marshall. You may remember George Marshall, as we had talked about him during World War II. He was the Army Chief of Staff. He was the guy that was in the United States that basically put MacArthur in the Pacific and put Eisenhower in Europe. By doing these things, all right, and World War II went really successful, he gets promoted. Not surprisingly. You can't go up from being the head of the entire United States military very much, but he does become the Secretary of State under Truman in Truman's second term. So, Truman comes out and says, the Truman Doctrine says, do whatever you want to prevent communism from spreading. We're like, you can blow anybody up that you want to. George Marshall, who has seen quite a bit of horrificness from World War II, says, hey, why don't we try something not blowing people up first? Which I think is interesting, that when you see generals rise to these high positions and then they don't want to use the military anymore, typically those generals have seen things and they're like, well, surely the military has to be a last resort. George Marshall is an example of this. So he says, I can do anything I want to prevent communism from spreading. And Truman says, anything that you want. He goes, okay, I got an idea. And Truman's like, all right, what are we going to do? We're going to blow people up? Or I don't know if Truman was that intent on blowing things up. But he can do anything that he wants. Marshall's like, George Marshall, Secretary of State George Marshall, says, what if we just give them money to be friends with us and to not be communist? Like, literally, what if we just throw money at our problem and see if it goes away? And Truman's like, I don't care what you do. Let's try it. So the Marshall Plan, which, Truman Doctrine says you can do whatever you want. Marshall Plan is a very specific version of the Truman Doctrine, which says, let's just give money to people that need it. See, communism, countries that are destroyed, the idea of communism is beneficial because what it does is says we're all in this together, everybody's equal, we all build up together. There's not rich people unaffected, there's not poor people, because people worry about starving to death. That doesn't happen. Everybody eats or nobody eats in a communist society. That's the mentality, with the belief that it would always be everybody eats. Didn't always turn out that way. But, so a lot of countries that are completely destroyed, communism is typically really good for poor people. All right? So it is really enticing these countries that are completely dilapidated after World War II to be suckered into the idea of communism. All right? The Bolshevik Soviet Union version of communism. America sees this. And we're like, all right, how are we going to help these people out? We don't want them to be communists. How about we just throw money at them? And that's what America does. Now, typically, there's a lot of times in American history we try to throw monies at a problem, and it feels very disrespectful to the countries that we're trying to give money to, because it's almost like, hey, we don't really have a moral high ground here, but here's dollars. Are you happy now? Typically, that doesn't work. At this point in history, works fabulous, because the countries we give money to are run down and they need to rebuild. So the Marshall Plan gives out tons of money. And this is an American cartoon of it. The idea that America gives out food, raw material, stuff these countries need to get back on their feet until they can, get back to a level of normalcy like before World War II. Because the countries we're giving this supplies to are countries that were absolutely decimated by World War II, like completely wiped out their countries and everything's just in shambles. America, we're lucky enough, we have a lot of money that we can give out. Russia doesn't have that much money. Russia can't do the same thing we can do with the Marshall Plan because they don't have the straight cash to give the countries. What they have is their political system, which is communism, where everybody's mandated to be exactly the same and everybody has to be equal. So the best example of this, all right, of how this worked very well, and you can visually see why this would be enticing to people. So this is Germany. This is at the time, we're going to talk about East and West Germany today. This is West Germany. This is under the control of a democracy, but America was very concerned that this area would choose to be communist because they were absolutely destroyed after World War II. So Stuttgart is a city here, and that one specifically because it's a very famous picture. This picture here of Stuttgart, all right, in Germany, these pictures are 8 years apart. The picture on the left is 1947 after World War II, and the entire city is just decimated. I mean, just gone, wiped out. 8 years later, this is from the same hilltop where this picture is taken. The entire city is brand new, paid for 100% with Marshall Plan money. Stuttgart's back on its feet. It doesn't need communism anymore. It can get back to its normal way of life. by America giving these countries, the only string attached to it, if we give you money, you're not allowed to be communist. Worked fantastic. No country that we gave money to after World War II under the Marshall Plan became communist. And this is all, everybody's super excited about this. This is great. It's a huge win. You know who's really grumpy about it? Who's not happy about it? Stalin. He feels like this is completely unfair. Of course, Stalin would think that America can just go throw money in European affairs and basically buy people's friendship, which typically doesn't work. But after World War II, absolutely, and America gets a lot of allies from the Marshall Plan, which was to give financial aid, get these countries back on their feet. Now, the Truman Doctrine said, hey, you can just go like completely annihilate every person that lives in Stuttgart. If you do that, they can't be communists. And Marshall's like, how about we give them money, supplies, raw material, get them back on their feet, then they'll like us. And Truman's like, I just do whatever you want. So Truman Doctrine is basically anything that stops communism from spreading, whereas the Marshall Plan, which is really the only plan that America uses extensively under the Truman Doctrine, which is just give countries money and see if they like us, worked fantastic at the time. So the question is, what is the Marshall Plan and how does it differ from the Truman Plan? Or sorry, how does it differ from the Truman Doctrine? So answer that completely. Pause me if you need to. And we're moving on. All right. The Berlin Airlift. This story is crazy. This is where it starts getting real between the United States and Russia, and how we come this close to World War III. And keep in mind, when I say this close to World War III, which, spoiler alert, ends up not happening, we come this close multiple times. Had World War III happened, we would have nuked the crap out of each other, which would have pretty much, with the nuclear fallout, probably would have destroyed the Earth. Catastrophic, unimaginable levels of devastation. So this fictional World War III I talk about almost happening, it's incomprehensible how completely annihilating it would have been. And we're going to talk about here in this dumb situation how close America and Russia come to World War III. All right. To explain this, I got to use a blank map here. Now, I need to draw all over this, so I'm going to disappear so that I can draw all over it. So this is Germany. All right, it's a blank map. I want to draw some stuff on it. So at the end of World War II, you got Russia charging in here from the east, and then from the west, you have the Allies charging in here, trying to get to Hitler here at the very end of World War II. Hitler kills himself, and the Nazi Party falls, and Germany is conquered. Now, the issue becomes, what do you do with Germany after World War II? So America wants to control it. Stalin wants to control it. Well, to simplify and to be nice so that everybody can get along, the appropriate thing to do, is share. So they decide to cut it in half. It actually is a little bit like this. All right. So they cut it in half. Now, it's not just super simple because technically these three little areas here, you have like England controls this, put an E here for England. You got France controls here, and then you have USA controls of this region here. All right, but these are all three democracies here. Russia, all right, Russia's going to control this area right here. So they have divided up Germany at the end of World War II. Now, this would work out fine, all right? We divided it in half. It made sense as well to divide it in half because the rest of the Iron Curtain kind of extends down here. So this makes it sense. You got the Soviet Union over here. You got the the democracies on this side. Now here's where the problem comes in. All right. So let me get rid of that. Let me draw my line here in half. So it comes to Berlin. Berlin is the capital of Germany. this is where all your main stuff is going to take place at in Germany, is Berlin's where all your natural resources are. And whoever controls Berlin basically controls the whole country. So what do you do with Berlin? We'd be like, well, Mr. Wagstaff, you will cut it in half as well. And you would be correct. That's exactly what they want to do. The problem is that Berlin is not right here. This is not where Berlin is. Berlin is smack dab in the middle of what's called East Germany. I'll put EG here for East Germany. East Germany, which is controlled by Stalin, and this is West Germany here that is controlled by the Allies and the democracies. So they're going to divide Berlin in half, in two. This is East Berlin, EB, beep, beep, and this is West Berlin, which is WB, all right? So where this gets tricky is West Berlin here is half a city that is a democracy inside the Soviet Union, inside the Iron Curtain, and it is the only thing inside the Iron Curtain that exists that is not under the control of Stalin. So I am going to this little city here of East and West Germany. Well, let's zoom in on that. All right. So once again, you got West Germany here, all right, which is under control of America. You have East Germany, which is under control of Stalin. And then Berlin. You have West Berlin right here. And you have East Berlin that's here. East Berlin is under the control of Stalin. West Berlin is under control of the Allies. So this becomes very important very quickly. And the reason that is you would think, ooh, so anybody that lives here in West Berlin, all right, anybody that lives here in West Berlin would have access to see what's going on inside the Soviet Union. Not really. And the reason that is because the people inside the Soviet Union didn't know what was going on in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union controlled the newspapers, the TV. So you can get these these television signals and these newspapers. You could get those outside of here. Like you could sneak them out. But it's all just state-run stuff. So you don't really know what's true and what's not. However, anybody that's inside the Soviet Union, all around here, anybody that's around here, they don't have any idea what happens over here. They have no idea what happens over there. So they're real interested in what takes place in West Berlin. It's the only city that they can have eyes on that basically shows them what life would be like in a democracy. Well, America knows that very well. So what we do, and let me zoom in here on the actual city of Berlin. So the next map is just of the city of Berlin. So you have West Berlin and East Berlin, and again, all the green area is controlled by Stalin. All the gray is a democracy. So what America does is we are allowed, let me go right back here, from West Germany, because we have to supply West Berlin with everything they have, because there's no way Stalin would provide them with anything. So we are allowed to use these highways, all right, under, I'm sure, gun, as all these transfer trucks come in here and supply West Berlin with everything that they need. Well, so West Berlin, we don't just give them what they need. We give them every possible thing. We give them a PlayStation 17 and like everybody. They basically live like kings. We ship in so much food. We purposely want them to throw away about 40% of it that will go rotten before they can eat it, just to show, because we know that starvation has been a long issue in Russia, just to show the rest of the Soviet Union who's watching this one half of a city that's a democracy, how wonderful it is to be in a democracy. So we are pumping in tons and tons and tons of food into here, all right? And Stalin gets grumpy about it, all right? Stalin doesn't like the fact that there's so much food, there's so much cool stuff here in West Berlin that the East Berliners, all right, start like coming across into West Berlin to live in West Berlin because it's better than living in East Berlin, where they have to live like every other person in the Soviet Union because they're communists and everybody has to be exactly the same. So Stalin is so irritated about this that he does something that is kind of a dumb, it is a dumb battle to pick, figuratively. So once again, you have to come across this border here that Stalin allows in transfer trucks to supply West Berlin, and then they just come right back. Well, when he's tired of West Berlin looking good, he puts a blockade at the border. So this is an actual photograph of the border here going from West Germany into East Germany as they're trying to travel to get West Berlin their supplies. And he just closes down the roads. Says nobody else can come in. His entire goal here is to make them starve to death. Well, obviously, that's not going to be a thing that America is going to let happen. They're not just going to let West Berlin starve to death. So if he won't let our trucks go in, and he's radio silence, he won't respond to an email, or like they had email, phone call, a fax. They didn't have faxes, carrier pigeon, anything. He won't respond to anything. So America's a little concerned. So what America has to decide to do, and now this is risky. This is when you escalate to a possible World War III level. We're going to fly in supplies. Now, this is a no-fly zone. No planes can fly over that border, all right, because that's like an act of war. But America's like, he's going to actively try to starve people to death that is under the control of under the supervision of America. We can't, and he won't talk to us. He just blocked off any goods from coming in, basically attempting to starve them to death to show how weak America is. Like, they've only got half a city, can't even get them food. America refuses to allow that to happen. So we have all these planes that we are going to fly in to Berlin. It's going to be famously called the Berlin Airlift. So we need like hundreds of thousands of planes to fly in this massive amount of food. Now, where would you get enough of these massive planes that needs to fly in massive amounts of cargo at this time? Well, they don't have food-carrying planes in 1949, 4 years after the end of World War II. But what you do have? A whole bunch of these. Bombers. We tell someone, hey man, I know you're not responding to, not checking your voicemail here, but we are sending in these planes filled with food. We know they're bombers. We don't have time to go make food delivery planes. They don't have bombs on them. We are delivering food. Do not shoot down our planes. If you shoot down our planes, that is an act of war. Now, America flying planes across the border into the Soviet Union is also an act of war. So they load up all these planes with food, and sure enough, they fly them over, and they're sitting here. This is a World War II era anti-aircraft gun. This is actually from the Germans and the Nazis. But I wanted to show you that these still existed. These are now under the control of the Soviet Union. They look like this. They can shoot down all these planes, and you can guarantee they are all trained on these planes as they are flying over. Stalin chooses not to fire. Had Stalin fired on those planes, that would have started World War III. But he chooses not to because he's like, oh, like he has escalated this situation, which is dumb, for no good reason. The planes land, they unload, they fly back, and they have to do it every single day for like a year. And Stalin has to sit here and watch these bombers fly over his border into West Berlin. It makes him look weak. He doesn't have a way out. He's either has to like escalate this, and any escalation at this point, again, World War III, we all die, or he has to back down. And that's actually what Stalin does, is Stalin backs down and opens up the gates and says, fine. He doesn't even communicate about this. He just says, gate is open, all right? And when he opens the gate, all right, we stop using airplanes and we bring trucks back in from West Germany. All right, okay, now you can use like the Autobahn again. You can use the highway system there in Germany. From West Germany, you can take it across East Germany area. Probably not going to make any pit stops. Unload there in West Berlin and then come back. It is a huge win for the Allies. All right, as the newspaper here says. But we came real close to World War III. There was so much tension here, and Stalin is not a big fan of not winning a battle. and figuratively. So he's very grumpy about the outcome here of this, because he decided to not let, like, I don't know what he thought the process was going to be if America would just let the people starve to death. But regardless, it makes him look weak. And it makes America look strong, and he's grumpy about that. So the question here is, what was the Berlin airlift, and how did it raise tension between the Americans and the Soviet Union? So basically, explain to me what the Berlin airlift was, and why it brought us very close to World War III. So answer that completely, and we're moving on. So the reason Stalin wanted to stop people, or wanted to cut off anyway, is because people were coming from East Berlin here over into West Berlin, and it made them really, really grumpy. So this hasn't been remedied. This is still an issue now that West Berlin here, all right, is now getting tons and tons of food. All right. You still have people coming over from East Berlin over here to West Berlin. Sometimes they go for a day trip. You got families that live on each side. And he can't stand this. He hates the intermingling of the two sides. And he also knows he can't compete with what they have at West Berlin. So what he does, and it's almost instantaneously overnight, is he builds a wall. He builds a wall, and it starts out as just barbed wire between West Berlin and East Berlin. And all of a sudden, one morning, people wake up, and there is a wall between East and West Berlin. There's a lot of famous pictures, like this one, of people jumping over the Berlin Wall when it first got created. I was actually just looking for like what it looked like when people woke up one morning between East Berlin and West Berlin, and it was just barbed wire like this. This is a soldier who clearly was like he probably knew what was coming, and he said, I got to make a decision right now. Because on the first day, you're like, oh, there's barbed wire, all right, they don't want us to cross, whatever. Well, that barbed wire quickly is going to escalate into a much more advanced wall to prevent this from happening. So you can see the barbed wire here in the back, and they are immediately just putting up a wall as fast as they can to prevent people from going from one side to the other. All right. You start seeing a lot of scenes like this. So obviously the wall was like on either side of this building, and before they can like board up all these windows and prevent people from like doing this, people are like going in this building and then hopping out like a first floor window to run over to West Berlin side. Unless you had like family in East Berlin, nobody's racing from West Berlin back into East Berlin. That really wasn't a thing. I'm sure it did happen some when you had family. You're spending a day trip in West Berlin trying to get back to your family. Because if you got caught on the other side of that wall, considering that this is going to last 40 years, you would not have contact with them for 40. Like, you know, it was forever. Like that wall goes up and you never see your family again. Because Stalin didn't want this to happen. Now you're like, well, why don't you just go around the wall? The wall actually gets built all the way around West Berlin. All right, the American city. So there are checkpoints. So like the transfer trucks can show up. They're bringing food, and they had to go through a checkpoint to get in, and those people could leave. All right, and go to, you know, other area like, you know, outside of the Soviet Union. But nobody in the Soviet Union could come into Berlin. So the wall quickly got more advanced. It took them a few years, but this is what the wall pretty much ended up being. It's basically like two walls, all right? You have, you know, like a 10-foot wall, barbed wire, little mini walls, guard dogs, landmines, sand, anti-vehicle ditch, so you can't like run through and and then at the other end, you'd have to like clear another wall. So I want to show you this, and I'll show you an actual photograph here. This is an actual photograph by the 1980s of what this wall looked like that surrounded West Berlin. You weren't going from one side to another. All right. So extremely effective. I mean, there were people who like stowed away in cargoes and stuff, but nobody just made a dash for it out here with like snipers and stuff. People didn't. That wasn't a thing. So effectively, Russia has surrounded West Berlin to prevent anybody from the Soviet Union going to West Berlin. This is called the Berlin Wall. It becomes incredibly famous in American history because America talks about it all the time. We love talking about the Berlin Wall because what America says is, oh, you want to know who's better, the Soviet Union or America? The Soviet Union literally had to build a wall to keep their people from going to an American-owned city. There's no walls America has to build to prevent people from going to the Soviet Union. Y'all want to go to the Soviet Union? Anybody want to go to the Soviet Union? Anybody? Anybody? Feel free. No? Okay. Russia has to build a wall to prevent their people from coming to our way of life. We don't have to do that. So America actually sees this wall, and that's one of the reasons the Berlin Wall becomes so famous, is America talks about it all the time as an example that Russia has to build a wall to keep its people in. America doesn't have to do that. So the question here is, explain why the Berlin Wall became so famous, and how did America and the democratic countries use the wall as an example of how democracy is better than the Soviet Union? So we just got done talking about that. So answer that completely. See you guys tomorrow.